Uh, Thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with our group about Cypress and everything you do with Angular. And I thank everyone for joining today's stream. So we are JavaScript and Friends, and we do monthly meetups, and we also conduct a conference in Columbus, Ohio. So this is a brief description about our group on a whole. Subscribe to our mailing list. So with that said, thank you all for joining today. And Jesse, it is all yours.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Let me get my screen set up and we'll try to get some sharing going. All right, great, fantastic. All right, so today we're going to talk about end-to-end testing. And really, I think for a lot of us, the end-to-end testing has been very frustrating. I know it has been for me. I've been involved in end-to-end testing since probably 2009, 2010, using Selenium, Webdriver, those sorts of tools. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience always. I was really excited about it when these tools came out, but it wasn't always a great experience. I'm going to turn on this light to give us just a little, it's going to seem bright for a second. There we go. All right, hopefully you guys see my face just a little bit better. It's a little dark here in this deal. All right, so a little bit about myself. My name's Jesse Sanders. I am an Angular Google developer expert. I live here in Denver, Colorado, and I regularly speak around the world on topics, a lot of stuff around testing and also state management. In fact, next Monday, I'm actually leaving for China to go speak at NG China. I'm very excited about that. You can reach me at jesse.sanders@breebug.com. That is my actual email address. Please don't spam me. And you can also, probably the best way to reach me is actually on Twitter at jesse_breebug. You can follow me. I'll try to respond to direct messages as quickly as possible. That's probably the best way to usually get a hold of me. All right, so a little bit about who I am. As I said, I'm a GDE, but I've been a developer now for 20 some odd years. I started out on VB4. I really started out on a TRS-80 color computer back in like the 80s, learning how to code extended color basic, but more formal education was with VB4 onto 5 and 6 into VB.NET, C#, and eventually into the JavaScript land. So currently I mostly focus on Angular and helping enterprises build robust web applications. But when I'm not out working on technical stuff, you can usually find me running, biking, swimming. I've got a half Ironman that I'm preparing for on December 8th in Palm Springs. I'm really looking forward to. Wish me luck. I think it's going to be a real effort there to get that one done. So, all right. So usually what I like to ask people is who's writing end-to-end tests? And usually it's about half the people in the room will raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm doing it. And then the next question I like to ask is who's actually enjoying writing end-to-end tests? And that's usually like a small percentage, like 1 or 2. And that's not uncommon. So if you find yourself in this spot, don't feel alone. A lot of people are frustrated with the testing tools that are available. And until now, it's been kind of tough. And we talk about test tools. I like to talk about Selenium. And whether you're talking about Selenium, Webdriver, Protractor, Nightwatch, or one of the other various flavors, ultimately what we're talking about is Selenium. So all of these are built upon either Selenium. Webdrivers actually was a separate product, but then they merged with Selenium, and they all use the basic same type of technology to do things. And they're a little bit problematic. So end-to-end testing is hard. One, because the tests take too long to run. You know, when we start out writing the tests, it's really not like that big of a deal because we only got a couple of tests and they run fairly quick. And before we know it, though, once we get into the hundreds or thousands of tests, then they become very, very slow and kind of painful. Probably the biggest pain point for most people is that they fail intermittently. They become flaky. We can't depend on them. You know, we run them one day and they pass perfectly, and the next day they just start flaking out. You run them again, those tests pass. Now new tests are flaking out, and so it's a bit of a challenge for developers to be able to do this. And this results in us doing a lot of timing issues, dealing with those and creating hacks to get around them, trying to figure out ways to make sure that element's available or that this action is completed by the time that we're actually executing it. So we spend a lot of time writing wait functions or other sort of mechanisms to try to hack the system together. So, and eventually what we see is that developers just give up. It's not worth it. You know, they'll have hundreds of tests and then they'll just go like, you know what, we're not going to run these anymore. They don't mean anything. We stop paying attention. They take 8 hours to run. By the time they get finished, I no longer associate it back to my PR. Of course, it couldn't be my changes that caused it to fail. Most likely they were your changes. You get my point. It becomes very difficult and people just go like, okay, I'm kind of fed up. And so you wanted something really simple, and what you really ended up with is this really complex system of trying to test our applications, and it becomes quite a mess. So how did this all kind of start? Well, when Selenium was born, anybody recognize this? GeoCities, right? GeoCities was the web of choice, I guess, really back in the day. And this is what we were building. We were building web applications that were really just based on HTML and a little bit of CSS. No JavaScript, no dynamic sort of interactions. And so in 2004, when Selenium was born, this was the web. Most web pages were some similar sort of resemblance to this, maybe not the crazy color scheme and all that, but it was the same sort of problems, same sort of technology, server-side rendered. So server-side rendered, we had full page refreshes. So this is in the days where you'd fill out a form, you'd hit the submit, it would go to the server, come back, say, well, you forgot a couple of things, you'd adjust that, hit submit, and if you're lucky, it would go ahead and accept it. And then we started introducing things like jQuery. I can remember being introduced to jQuery in about 2009, blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, I don't have to do a full round trip. And we started to get into AJAX calls and eventually where we're at now, which is client-side MVCs. So you think about the web when Selenium was created and now here's the web today. So this is a little glimpse into my Amazon page, and we have lots and lots of different web components that are being loaded here. You know, I've got my recommendations, things I recently viewed for the sound booth here, you know, video recommendations, Audible, you know, all sorts of stuff here. So the web is a lot more complicated and each one of these components is loading independently, yet we're trying to use something that was created in 2004 to try to solve problems that are much more modern. So the challenges with the modern web and with doing end-to-end testing is that we're trying to deal with a snapshot at a moment in time. This is probably one of the more difficult concepts to understand. But the idea here is that we're trying to find that exact perfect moment to start our test and execute it and say, hey, is this all set up correctly? And so this is where we start to get into the timing hacks of like, well, I think if this button shows up, then at this time, then go ahead and start the test. And unfortunately, over time, those start to fail and break down and it becomes kind of a mess. The other big challenge here is dealing with some sort of magic or seed data. So a lot of us historically might have created a seed database that has the exact type of data that we're looking for. We'll go search for that record and then be able to test for that edge case based on that seed data. Or the other option, which isn't really any better, is that we go create the data that we wanted and then go search to find it and then test the edge case and make sure that it passed. Both of those are problematic. Seed databases get out of, oh, how do I say this? They get out of date and they're no longer have the exact data that we need based on the changes that we're making. We're having to maintain database scripts to make sure that it's setting up data the way that we want. And then we're actually adding data to the as we go during the test. That's actually doubling or tripling or more the amount of time it actually takes to run our tests. And thus we're actually introducing more and more potential fail points. And then let's not forget the amazing error stack traces that are so cryptic. you'd almost need a PhD in these to try to figure out what actually went wrong. And usually it's a fairly blind, just, hey, an element wasn't found, but you don't have any understanding about why it wasn't found. We go back, we look at the page, we're like, no, the element's there. No, it looks like, I can repeat the steps of what it should have been doing. I do these manually. No, it's there. It should work. And so these stack traces, these error messages, they're tough to work with, not real easy. And then the other big thing here is that there's no dev tools during the tests. And so this makes it really hard to kind of debug, put a breakpoint, try to figure out what's going on. So often what I remember doing here is I'd have one window open with my tests and I have a breakpoint on it so I could stop and see where things are going. And then over here on the right-hand side, I'd have another window that's my application pulled up to the same exact point of the other one. And in that way I could get to the elements and try to figure out what was going on. So definitely not easy. Oh, did I mention the beautiful stack traces? If anybody forgot what those look like, type error, cannot read property, header printer of, I mean, it's just like crazy stuff here for us to try to figure out what went wrong and where. So at the end, where I think a lot of people arrive at is that end-to-end testing sort of sucks. It's not a lot of fun. It starts out great. It ends, in a really nasty mess that makes it really difficult for us to be able to do our jobs. So this is, I think, where most people just kind of throw in the towel and say, look, we're going to do more unit tests. We're going to try to do some sort of component type of integration testing where we try to wire up a component and fake it out and click on the HTML elements and try to do end-to-end testing, but using unit tests. Well, I tell you, there's a little bit better answer. For those of you that don't know the answer, I would tell you it's CypressIO. So Cypress actually changes the paradigm of how we do end-to-end testing. And I think it's something that regardless of what platform you're on, that you should strongly consider taking a look at it for doing your end-to-end tests, whether you be a developer, QA, or otherwise, that Cypress actually has some really great tools that make it easy. So the great thing is here, it is so easy to set it up, to author tests, to get it up and running, run those tests, and also to debug issues when they happen. So tonight, what I want to do, now we've talked about what the problem with end-to-end testing is, what I'd like to talk to you about is CypressIO, show you some examples here, and show you why you should strongly consider bringing this in. So the first thing I want to show you is how easy it is to set it up. You can go into your project and just say npm install Cypress, save dev. So if this is a React, Vue, or Angular project, it'll go ahead and install Cypress. You're good to go. You can start writing tests. If you're using Angular, you can use ng-add @Breebug Cypress schematic, and this will go ahead and add Cypress directly to your Angular project. So if you've generated one using the Angular CLI, then it will go ahead and remove the Protractor tests, some of the config stuff that's no longer necessary, and get it all ready to go. And then we can go ahead, either whichever way we do the install, we can now just run npx open, or I'm sorry, npx Cypress open, and that will go ahead and open up the interactive test runner. All right, so here's an example of what the interactive test runner looks like. It's going to look in the integration folder under Cypress, and it's going to try to find whatever tests are available there, and then we can click on any one of these tests, these spec files, and it will run all the tests within that file. So let's take a look at this really quick of what it looks like. Here, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. You can see I've got my Angular project here, and I went ahead and did the Cypress schematic add. So used ng-add the Breebug Cypress schematic, and it went ahead and removed the end-to-end folder, and we replaced it with the Cypress folder. Inside a Cypress folder, we got a few other folders here, like fixtures, integration, plugins, and support. Those are the defaults. Screenshots and videos, we'll talk about those later. But under integration, you can see here's where I have my tests. And this is what's, it's going to go ahead and show me. And then here is my actual window for the running the tests. So you can see here, I could click on article spec, and that will go ahead and kick that off for me. All right, so let's come back over here to our slides. So actually, this here is the actual test runner. So I'm going to come back over here and show you what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and click on article spec and have it go ahead and run the tests. So it's opened up a new window here. And this is going to tell me the number of tests that have successfully passed. This is the number that have failed. And this is the number that have been skipped. This here tells me how long did my, the 4.64 seconds tells me how long it took to run this test suite for tests. Here I've got actually a link. I can just go ahead and click on this. It'll pull up the web page itself. We'll come back and talk about this in a little bit, but allows me to see like what website are we hitting? What are we going to? It makes it really easy to pull that up. I can also specify here, what do I want my screen size to be? And it also tells me how I can change my Cypress JSON file to go ahead and set the viewport width and height to whatever custom values that I want. All right, so here is the actual screen of the website being tested, so I can see what's in here. I also have this selector. I can come over here and select on any element, and it's giving me the exact Cypress get call that I'll need to be able to get that. So that's a really nice feature, is being able to do the selector. And over here, you can see I've got my list of tests. And if I go ahead and click on one, you can see that here's each step. So the first thing that we did is we went out to visit the site, and you can see it's actually doing some loading. So the site itself has been loaded, but now it's looking to go out and load some articles. It's loaded the tags. You can see here's the request versus the response, and it's going back and forth between the two. And then it's going and getting the recent articles. And then we're selecting the app articles, and then we're doing an assertion to say the app article count should have a length above 0 so that we have at least one article. So what's great here is I can see what's occurring. You can see like these are all, if I click on that one, these are all selected. I can get more information on that. I can also go ahead and open up my dev tools, and I can see what my expected was. I can also, let's see here, when I actually get the app articles, I can see that I got 25 of them that came back. This was my selector. Oh, there's actually a few more commands. I can actually see each one of the app articles. I can expand them. I can find out more information about each one. So it's really nice for debugging. All of our debug tools are available to us just as if we're running locally, you know, in a regular debug environment. So this makes it really, really nice. We're trying to figure out, why is an element there? Why isn't this happening? Or am I getting the wrong one? What's going on here? All right, so that's a little bit about the test runner and whatnot. Let's jump back over here to our slides. All right. So the other thing that I want you to keep in mind, there's a bunch of other built-in libraries that are available to us. So we can use sign-on, we can use jQuery, underscore, we got blob, mini-match, moment, promise. So we got a lot of the built-in libraries automatically available to us. We don't have to do any sort of hacks to be able to bring those in. They're available, we can work with them, and we can use any of these to help us. All right, so as I said earlier, there's also screenshots and videos. So this is something that's very easy to implement. Originally, when we kicked off over here, if I'll go ahead and just kill this. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on screenshots, and I'm going to move that to trash. I'm going to videos, move that to trash. What I want you to see here is I can now go npx Cypress. Instead of using open, I want to use run. And when I use the run command, this is no longer going to be in the interactive mode. So it is going to go ahead and run this just like it'd be running up on our CI server. And when it's running these, it's going to go ahead and record videos. And if there's any sort of errors, it's also going to take screenshots. We can explicitly tell Cypress to take screenshots at various moments if we would like. Otherwise, for sure, what it's going to do is anytime an error occurs, it will go ahead and capture that. The videos themselves are everything. that are available to us during the running of the tests. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a failure or not, you can take a look at the video. Cypress is great about compressing the videos, getting them down to a nice, really small format, and then we can take a look at those and hopefully give us some more clues about if we did get an error, what happened. So here you see our tests are still running, and oh, it's actually running all of our tests. Yes, not just the one. So before, when I was actually using the interactive mode, I was just running the one test, or just the action, or not the actions, the articles spec test. This is running all the different tests. And anyway, basically what we should start to see in here is videos. You can see these here. We got some MP4s. You'll be able to watch these and actually see what occurred. And then we haven't had any errors, so we haven't got any screenshots so far. All right. So screenshots and videos automatically available to us. Highly recommend Cypress just for this feature alone. Like, it makes it a lot easier to help us hunt these down. And when I say these, hunt down any sort of errors and be able to resolve them quickly. All right. So authoring. What's really nice is when you do the NPX install, I had already deleted these, but when you do add a new project, underneath the integrations, it's going to have an examples folder. And in the examples folder, it's going to have an example of pretty much every single operation that you'd ever want to do with Cypress automatically get added to your project. Now, most people, obviously, when you get more experience with this, you'll just automatically delete those and you won't need them. But for learning and just starting out, like, it's great to have all the different examples available to you, so that you could figure stuff out pretty quickly on how to, how do I do a click? How do I do this? How do I do that? So yeah, it makes it really nice. Also, you can go out to, I believe, examples.cypress.io, and you can also see those examples there. Either way, they're the same exact ones. It just makes it nice to be able to know that there's examples out there probably that already exist that do exactly what you want to do. Yeah, there's the example, CypressIO. Like I said, authoring's pretty easy and logical. So let's take a look here. Kind of the general way of writing tests is this concept of visit, query, action, and should. So in our case here, we're doing our visit here. We're visiting example CypressIO, commands, actions, great. And then once we get done with that, then we're going to query. We are going to use the get command off the Cypress object, and we're going to look for anything that has a class of action focus. So that is our query. We're then going to take an action. So we're going to focus, and then we're going to should. So this is our expectation, our assertion, and we're going to say it should have class of focus, and that the previous element should have an attribute of style with a color of orange. Great. So there are our action, or our exact layout here: visit, query, action, should. And so that's the general layout. When we talk about actions, this is different types of actions that we can do. So you can see here, we're getting a button, we're clicking, we're double clicking, we're getting an input, we're typing. Notice here that we've got inside of our single curly braces, we have the word enter. We can use stuff like enter, tab, whatnot. And those are actually the equivalent of hitting the actual key. We can call clear on that input. We can get an input called first name. We can focus on it. We can blur. We can check or uncheck check boxes. So it's pretty intuitive. Pretty much any action that you can think of that you're going to need to do to an element is already available to you, and is going to be pretty logical for you to find. So there's a couple different types of assertions. This is another important thing to think about. So we have implicit subjects and explicit subjects, and this is really just a preference. Depending on what you like, you can write it either way. It does exactly the same thing. So in this case here, we're getting our header. So this has got an ID of header, and we want to get that anchor, and we're asserting that it should have a class of active, and that that it should have an attribute of href that is equal to users. And you can also do it the more explicit way where we go ahead and get, in this case, we're getting a different element, but then we're calling the should, and then we're using a lambda here, a big arrow function to say for each table row, expect the table row to have a class active and expect the table row to have an attribute of href with the value of users. Either way you can write it. It's really just a preference, but know that you can do it either way. All right, so handling errors. Again, not wanting to beat a dead horse here, but the error handling in some of the older Selenium tools were a little tough to work with. And obviously I showed you an example there of what they look like. The point with Cypress was to make sure that we had no more cryptic errors, so that errors were very understandable. We'd be able to read them and also, get some hints about why things are going wrong. And so here is a case where we're trying to, if we look at the first line, Cypress error, Cypress visit failed trying to load this internet address. Okay. Says that we attempted to make an HTTP request to this, but it failed. Common situations why this would fail: you don't have internet access, you forgot to run or boot your web server. That's the most common one, is that we forget to run ngserve or whatever it is we need to do to get our application up and running. But notice here, it is going to give us a stack trace down at the bottom. It's actually kind of cut off, kind of give us an idea where this occurred at. But really the main thing here is that it's giving us some clues. It's giving us a much better error message about what happened. And so I find this a lot more helpful when things go wrong. So let's see here. Let's talk about our first test. So in this case here, we go ahead and remove the Cypress tests, under Cypress integration examples, go ahead and remove those, and we create a new file called home page spec. And we'd paste this test in. So we're going to describe it's the home page. Our test is going to be that it successfully loads, and we're going to then go Cypress visit localhost 4200. So that's pretty simple to do. Let's go ahead and create this really quick. I'm going to come back over here and say, let's go ahead and create that. So now inside of integration, I have my home page spec. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to copy my describe. So I got my test in there. Fantastic. Now I should be able to do Cypress open. And this will take just a second. Now it went ahead and it's got the interactive launcher. I can see I've got my home page spec. I'm going to click on that. And it went ahead and launched my tests. And voila, the test completed. It's successfully loaded. Fantastic. We didn't have any errors. Nothing skipped. 1.8 seconds, 1.86. So good to go. Pretty simple to do there. All right. So let's talk about this site, because you've now seen it a couple of times, but this is a test site that myself and my good friend Joe Eames, he originally wrote it. I did some work on it, and then we decided we would make it a test site versus a real site. And so let's take a look at ngdoc.io. So if we come over here, I'm just going to click on this. This is a simplified version of the site. So this is actually just using JSON server to be able to serve up the articles. So it's not actually the full site, but it makes it really nice for being able to do the demo. If you actually go to ngdoc.io, that is actually the real full site, and you can do a little bit more with that. But in this case here, we have a list of tags. So these are the default tags. So these are the most common tags that people would typically search on. And then if I go ahead and let's say I do ngrx and search, no, there's nothing there for that. Maybe it's, there we go, it's case sensitive. So if I click on ngrx, now it's going to take a look at all the articles that match that, and then it's going to give me a list of remaining tags. So tags that are also on these articles yeah, are also available. So I could continue to filter it down. So I'm going to go ng module. Now I get down to 1, right? Great. So pretty simple there. And we could go ahead and click on a tag And this should go ahead and launch us out to a new window, and it actually take us out to the article, so on and so forth. So there's a few other things. I can actually search for articles themselves, you know, that ones that have NGRX in the title, and we can see, you know, which ones are those. Great. So that's a little bit about the site. Just want to make sure that give you at least a quick demo of it so you know kind of what we're doing here. All right, so the first thing we would do is go ahead and start the server. We'd already done that earlier. Actually have this over on this second tab, but you can see here I did ng serve, and we went ahead and launched this up. So, and here's where we actually got our test runner back on the first tab of that. All right, so we've got our server started. One of the common things that I hear people ask is, well, let's have Cypress start the server. I don't want to forget, right? But the problem is this, is that this is considered an anti-pattern. The execute command, which is what you would use to start the server, can only run tasks that eventually exit. Unfortunately, tasks like ng serve, they don't exit. You have to terminate them manually. And so that's why they're not a good candidate for this. This would also lead to port conflicts, and port conflicts leads to unnecessary test failures and complications. So it's best that we just go ahead and launch the Cypress server in the non-interactive mode, especially for up on the CI box, and just allow Cypress to run and not try to control that. So another best practice tip here is in the Cypress JSON. We saw this earlier when we were looking at setting the viewport size. So the Cypress JSON is a file that allows us to put some configuration in. So we can go ahead and set the base URL. This will help us warn us when the server's not running. We'll get the message, hey, I don't really see anything on localhost 4200. And it can be overridden using a config. So let's take a look at this really quick. I'm going to come down here to my Cypress JSON, and you can see that I've declared a base URL, and I've set it to localhost 4200. Now, when I run my application, if there is not an application on localhost 4200, the test runner will go ahead and complain and tell me, hey, we might have a little problem here. So this is really nice. I don't have to start running, you know, kicking off a batch of tests only to find out they're all going to fail because I didn't launch the server. So anyway, coming back over the slides here, saying that we can override using the -- config. And why this is important is because it eliminates hard-coded URLs. So in the original test here that I was showing you, we were going directly to a URL. And actually we don't want to do that. We want to basically use whatever's whatever's past our domain. So in our case here, localhost 4200, and then that would be the root domain. That is what we'd want to put into our Cypress JSON. But then if we wanted to go to the root main page, we would just use /. And in that way, we can move between different environments just by going ahead and using our config override. And that looks something like this. We've got our base URL, just like I was showing you. And then we can go ahead and do Cypress run, set my config, base URL equal to localhost 4300. Now it's going to go look on 4300 versus 4200. This is one of those best practices tips that'll save you a lot of time and problems later. All right, so is that it, right? That by itself, honestly, should be enough to probably convince you to take a look at it. But I can tell you that that's actually just the tip of the iceberg, that there's a lot more features available in Cypress that you're really going to enjoy. So the first thing, before we talk about that, I want to talk again about where end-to-end fails, and then we'll talk about what the solution there is. So, because we haven't addressed any of these issues, by the way. We talked about that it can be slow. I mean, it could be hours. We used to run tests. There's, I think, about 800 tests, and I think to run it on 2 browsers, I think it was about 8 hours. And so we'd only just kick it off once at night, and it wasn't for any one PR. So it was really hard to figure out who broke the end-to-end tests, or if anybody broke them. So slow is a big problem. The whole seed magic data is a huge problem. The tough to test edge cases, you know, getting that exact right data so that, you know, this panel shows up. So the example I give often is, let's say we have a product display panel, and when the if I'm logged in as an admin and the quantity in stock is less than 10, that we have a manager reorder panel show up where I can go ahead and reorder more product. How would we test that with a traditional Selenium test? Well, we either have to have a product that's been seeded with data, with a inventory less than 10, or I'd go create it and then go find it. And again, neither one of those are great. So again, that's where the big problem here is. Also this whole fragile test, and a lot of this just comes down to timing. So how do we get around this? So this is where the real magic happens with Cypress, and why I think your minds will be blown and you'll want to get on Cypress right away. So first thing I want to do is introduce you to a concept called stubbed responses. So stubbing responses is recommended for most tests. And what do we mean by stubbed responses? Well, it's actually saying, hey, I know you're going to go make a request to the server, to the API to go get this data, but instead I want you to return this data instead. Now, often we've done this with, let's say, mocks or something like that in our unit tests, but we haven't had a way to do this in our end-to-end tests until now. So Cypress gives us the ability to go ahead and watch for external API requests that are occurring, and be able to declare routes and then return data for those. So it is recommended for most tests, as we don't need to really be testing the back end. What we really want to do is test our components, our web application. For those diehards that believe that end-to-end tests means actually testing the back end, I would tell you that's great. I understand. I can appreciate that. But I think that the API team should really be responsible for writing those tests, and including load testing, and are we getting the correct responses that we think. The purpose of the end-to-end test for our web application is from the buttons and whatnot, and data that the users are interacting to the moment that it leaves the browser. And that's what stubbing allows us to do. So I'm not saying to get rid of all complete end-to-end all the way to the back end tests. The idea here is you want at least one test for each feature that is a true all the way from the front all the way to the back, what I would call a smoke test. So have one of those and stub the rest. So that way we make sure that all our integration points are hooked up, but then we can get down to the business of testing our web pages, our web applications, our components, and making sure they're doing exactly what we want them to do. By doing this, by stubbing responses, our tests are way faster. We don't have to wait for data to come back from the API. So it's instantaneous. We can add delays to it if we'd like. We can control how quickly it comes back, but ideally we want it to come back as quickly as possible and just work through these tests and prove out that these components are going to render and handle the interactions the way that we think. And we don't have to worry about magic data, seed data, or setup, or any of this stuff, because we can actually tell it the exact data to return, so we can hit each one of our edge cases seamlessly and flawlessly. All right, so let's talk about stubbing, because it's super easy to do, and let's look at what the anatomy here is. The first thing is we're going to use a Cypress object, and we're going to say CyServer. So this actually starts the stubbing server, and it's going to now start watching for stuff. We can then call CyRoute, and this allows us to go ahead and define a route. In this case here, we're using an object literal, and we're saying the method, we're only going to watch for gets. We're only going to watch for on this URL that's users, and we're going to use a wildcard. And then I want the response to be an empty array. So now what's going to happen is anytime we make a get call to users, we're just going to get an empty array back, and that's going to happen automatically. So stubbing solves a lot of problems. As we said earlier here, fast tests, consistent results, the true end-to-end test can be smoke tests, but there's more. Before we go on to what's more, let's actually take a look at some examples here. So I am going to use stubs. And the first thing we're going to do here is I've got my articles using stubs, and I've declared my first test. It's going to call CyServer, and I'm going to go ahead and declare a route. Now this is actually using a slightly different method here. It's no longer using an object literal. I'm saying any route, we don't care what, or I'm sorry, not any route, any verb. So any type of HTTP call, so whether it be a get, put, post, so on and so forth, as long as it matches API articles recent, then go ahead and return an empty array. We're going to go ahead and visit the root page, and we're going to get the app articles to see if any articles show up, and it should have a length of 0. Why? Because we returned an empty array. Great. So we're able to test that out. Now, how would we test that in the case of our application with something like Selenium? We'd have to delete all of our data and then, right, have it do this test and then seed some more data back in. I'm not sure. That gets really tough. Now, in this case here, it's basically the same exact test. We're calling again server, we're declaring the route, but this time we're actually embedding the data in here, and then we are aliasing it. And in this case, what we're doing is we're saying, go ahead and visit the root page, and now we want to do a wait. So we haven't talked about waits yet, but this allows us, now that we have an alias, we can say this articles, so we just use the @ sign to indicate that this is an alias, and it'll go ahead and wait for that call to complete, and then we can get the app article, and it should have a length of 1. So this is an additional feature that we have here that allows us to wait for a call to complete. And then if we look over here, I think I have some more examples on the wait. So this is a technique here, as we just saw in the last one, but I want to show it to you for tags. So here we're not actually declaring the data. So this is actually, if we're doing a true end-to-end test, but we don't want to change what the data is, we can. We're going to go ahead and launch our server. We're going to call Cypress route and say watch for API tags. And we're just going to alias that as tags, and then we're going to wait for tags to complete. And then once that's done, then we can go ahead and get the tags container input, type ANIM, and then we should have a, for the tags that it found, it should have a length of 3. So that's the wait there. Very powerful. All right, so if you didn't notice here, when actually coming back over here to using stubs, think about this test here where we're putting in a single record, right, for the response. But man, what if we had to add a bunch of these, and it was, you know, you see how this would stack up really quickly, right? This becomes a kind of a new nightmare. Now I've got all this data being added to my tests, and it gets a little messy. So the Cypress team thought about this and said, hey, look, what if we had a way that we could move this data off into another area? So here what we have is we're actually declaring another route called get on users, and now we're saying, but instead of hard coding the data in here, I'm going to use Fixture : that says, hey, go to the Fixture folder and find the user's JSON file in there, and use that for the response. So now we can remove the data that's over here, you know, in this route, and I can go ahead and remove it out, and I can have it load from a fixture located in the folder there. Take a look at the example of that in a minute. The other way that we can do it, if we want a little bit more verbose way, we can first define the fixture saying, hey, it's users JSON. It'll go find that in the fixtures, the fixture folder, and I want to go ahead and alias that as users JSON. And then in my route, I can say get users on that route, on the users route for get verb, go ahead and return this alias. This is obviously the shorthand version of it. The longhand is here. I prefer the first one here. So a little bit easier. So fixtures are super powerful. Let's see here. Let's come back over here. So we got fixtures. All right, so we got some tests on that. Let's take a look at this here. So in my case here, I called Cypress server. I'm declaring my route, and I'm going for recent articles, and I'm saying go find the fixture articles and alias that as recent. I'm going to go ahead and visit the main website. I'm going to wait for recent, and then I'm going to say it's going to have a length of 3. So let's go look at fixtures. I have articles, JSON. If I open that up, I've got 1, 2, 3. Hence why we would have 3 elements then when we go select those. So we're able to very easily point it to that article's fixture. It's a lot cleaner, a lot smaller test for us. The next way of doing this here is the same exact thing, except for now a slightly different syntax. I'm first declaring the fixture, articles JSON, as this, as articles JSON, and then I am declaring a route, which says anything for articles recent. We're going to use that alias, and it's going to alias that as recent. We're going to visit the main page, wait for it, so on and so forth. We could also shorthand this and not go, you know, based on what we were doing back here, and just use fixture directly. I guess that's actually what we were doing up here. All right, so 2 different ways of writing the same exact test, your preference on which way you want to do it. Great. All right, so how about waiting for calls to return? We talked about this just a little bit with waits earlier, but let's talk about how much more we can do with this. So this case here, we're actually creating 2 different routes using fixtures for activities and messages, and then aliasing them as get activities, get messages. We're going to go ahead and visit our website, and then we're going to wait. Notice here, we're not using just parentheses. We're using also array data here. So you can declare it either way. If you're going to have more than one thing you're going to wait for, you're going to pass it as an array. And we're going to have the 2 different calls that we're going to wait for. So it's actually going to wait for Chrome to go ahead and make those 2 different calls. And once those both complete successfully, which in this case here, they're actually going to get intercepted by our route that's declared, given the fixture data. And then after those are both loaded, it'll go on to the next step. All right, so one of the more complicated ones that comes up is how would we do an autocomplete and wait for that call? So in this case here, we launch the server and we go ahead and declare a search route that's going to return item book 1, book 2 as get search. And then we're going to get the autocomplete and we're going to type book into it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the get search to complete. So this will have gotten called by the autocomplete, and it'll return these 2 books in the array, and its URL should include search query equals book. So this is something that the component would be doing. And in the results, so we're taking these items here and they're actually getting displayed in a results container, and it should contain book 1 and contain book 2. So you can see here very easily we're able to go ahead and test out something like an autocomplete and make sure it's returning exactly what we want without it actually having to go to the backend API and do anything at all. All right, so in summary here today, what I hope you got out of this is that UI tests can be dependable, that end-to-end actually becomes more valuable now today than I believe unit tests. So actually what I see a lot of people talking about is inverting the triangle, where usually unit test is the base of the triangle and that's where we're putting most of our tests. And the smallest is the end-to-end, with the integration tests being sandwiched in between them. And what I see is that a lot of people are inverting that triangle, that the base now is actually end-to-end tests with a little bit less integration and a lot less unit tests. And really just unit testing only for business logic in our services. So end-to-end, you know, in full amounts, you know, from all the way to the back end, those are great. In small amounts, those are okay. But that stubbing is really the way to go. That with stubs, we can make sure that we're getting data quickly. Our test runs super fast. We can test out all our edge cases, and we can eliminate all this crazy hacky stuff that's been going on. And have very reliable tests. So, and ultimately here, these complex interactions become manageable and testable. All right, so a little bit on the end here, my company, I'm the CEO and founder of Breebug. If you haven't heard of us, we're located here in Denver, Colorado, and we're an Angular consultancy shop. We're We're Angular experts. I'm an Angular GDE, as I said myself, and we work with about 10 total Angular GDEs and also have access to the Angular team. We're here for trusted guidance. We help with strategy and implementation and a proven client experience. Just in case you missed it earlier, here's my contact information. And if anybody has any questions at all, I'd be happy to take those now.
Thanks, Jesse, for going over Cypress. I think we have a question from Olina in the chat window.
Yes, absolutely. So the question here is, Protractor has a built-in feature for waiting until Angular app is fully loaded. How can this be achieved in Cypress? Thanks. That's a great question. And I would say it's only kind of partly true that Protractor has this. So Protractor has something that says, make sure that the page is loaded, kind of, but it doesn't actually, like if there's any other sort of interactions that are occurring, it wouldn't pick those up. And so with Cypress, you could use wait commands. So but by default, Cypress is going to give you about 4 seconds for elements to go ahead and show up. And so if you need longer than that, then I would go ahead and look at what are the calls that are being made for your, let's say it's your dashboard or whatever page that is, and then go ahead and set up those routes and then just wait for each one of those. And then that would go ahead and achieve it. But Protractors, from what I understand, it's actually looking at the internal life cycle, and to try to determine when is the best time to say, hey, yes, we're ready to go. But unfortunately, it's still subject to the same problems that traditional Selenium and Webdriver have, because honestly, that's what Protractor is, just a wrapper around those. Great. Any other questions I can answer? All right. Well, I think at this time, Bhaskar, if people have questions, you can definitely email me later. You can reach out to me. Please follow me on Twitter. You can send me a direct message on there. I'm happy to respond. And, you know, if we can be of any help to you in any way going forward, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask.